I heard someone calling my name from the water before I even reached the pier, and for a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The sky was a solid gray wall, heavy with rain, and the waves licked at the pilings with a sound that was both rhythmic and threatening. The beach was deserted, completely silent except for the pounding rain and the distant hum of the city behind me. My sneakers slipped on the slick sand, and I almost stopped, telling myself I was imagining it. But the voice came again, high-pitched, terrified, unmistakable. I ran faster, heart hammering in my chest. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead, stinging my eyes, and my lungs burned as I sprinted toward the pier. Then I saw him, or I thought I did, a small shape struggling in the water, arms flailing, head bobbing under the waves. He was just a few meters from the pier, and panic surged through me so violently that it felt like electricity in my veins. Without thinking, I ripped off my coat and threw myself into the freezing water. The shock was immediate. My body screamed in protest. My lungs burned, and for a heartbeat, I questioned everything. Why am I doing this? I should not. I can't. But the next moment, instinct took over. I felt his small body beneath my hands, slippery and cold, and I grabbed him around the torso, trying to keep his head above the waves. He coughed violently, water spilling from his mouth, and I gasped in relief when I heard him inhale, a jagged, trembling breath that sounded impossibly fragile in the roaring storm. My hands shook as I paddled toward the shore, dragging him over the slick surface of the pier, over rocks that cut at my palms, over water that threatened to swallow us both. When we reached the sand, I collapsed next to him, drenched, shivering, and utterly terrified. His lips were blue, his eyelids fluttering, and his tiny chest rose and fell in erratic bursts. I did not know what to do. CPR videos I had watched 1,000 times flooded my mind, clashing with sheer panic. I pressed on his chest, counted out the beats, whispered encouragement I did not really feel, and waited for a miracle. And then it came. His chest rose in a ragged, coughing gasp, and I could almost hear the relief rushing through my own veins. He blinked at me, wet hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with fear and confusion, and murmured something that I could not understand through the pounding of rain in my ears. For a moment, the world narrowed down to just him and me, two strangers held together by sheer survival. The ambulance arrived minutes later, though it felt like hours, and hands pulled me back while paramedics took the boy, assessed him, and wrapped him in blankets. I was still shaking uncontrollably when they asked for my name, my story, my version of what happened, and I found myself stammering, unable to separate memory from adrenaline. My clothes were soaked, my shoes ruined, my hands cut and raw, but I did not care. He was alive, and for the first time in years, I felt a raw, unfiltered kind of purpose. That night, I could not sleep. I kept seeing the way his small hand had clutched my jacket, the way his eyes had widened as he inhaled, the strange weight of his tiny body against mine. I tried to tell myself it was a blur, that my mind was inventing details, but the memory was too vivid, too sharp. And yet, somewhere deep down, a whisper of doubt crept in. The next morning, the police called me to the station. My heart sank as I drove there, still damp from the previous night's rain, hair sticking to my neck, mind spinning. I expected questions about the boy's condition, about his family, maybe even congratulations. Instead, they showed me the security camera footage from the pier, from the streetlights, from every angle that might have captured the scene. I watched in disbelief as the events unfolded before me on the grainy black and white screens. I saw myself run, dive, thrash in the water. I saw myself kneel on the sand, performing CPR, but there was nothing else. No small body, no splashing, no flailing, no one struggling in the waves. Just me, alone, fighting the void. I blinked at the screen, my chest tightening. He was right there, I said, my voice shaking. I felt him. I touched him. He coughed. He was... The officer looked at me calmly, almost too calmly. We've checked all reports. No missing children, no drowning calls, nothing unusual reported at the pier last night. Are you sure you're feeling well? I felt the ground shift beneath me. I saw him. He was alive. He was right there in the water. The officer's expression did not change. Ma'am, sometimes adrenaline and stress can make the mind perceive things that are not there. We'll arrange for a doctor to check on you if you'd like. I left the station feeling like I was crumbling from the inside out. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand someone believe me, but another part of me whispered that maybe it had been a hallucination, a trick of light, the storm, my imagination. Yet I knew better. My hands still remembered the shape of his shoulders, the wet weight of his body against mine. My lungs still remembered the panic, the desperate inhalations, the fragile gasp that had meant life. Days passed. I could not stop thinking about him. I started seeing him everywhere, reflections in windows, fleeting shadows in the subway, a small cough behind me in quiet rooms. It was maddening. I avoided the pier, avoided the rain, avoided bodies of water entirely, but still he lingered. My dreams were full of him, struggling, calling my name, floating in a gray, stormy void. Friends noticed my change in behavior. I would jump at sudden sounds, my eyes scanning the dark corners of rooms, my hands trembling. They suggested therapy, medications, rest, anything to calm me down. I tried, I really did, but nothing worked. He was still there, in my mind, and now I began to realize something more terrifying. I was not just haunted by a memory, I was haunted by him. Weeks later, I woke to a sound I will never forget. It was faint, almost polite, a soft cough at the foot of my bed. My heart nearly stopped. I froze, staring into the darkness, waiting for my eyes to adjust. And then I saw him, not fully, just a shadow, a small silhouette, drenched as if from the rain, looking at me with eyes that were too old, too knowing for a child. You did what you had to, he whispered. His voice was small, but it carried weight, an authority that made my stomach twist. But now it's your turn. The words hung in the air. I wanted to speak, to protest, but my voice would not come. I wanted to move, to run, but my body was rooted to the mattress. And then, as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. The room was empty, silent, save for my ragged breathing. I sat there for hours, unable to convince myself it had been real. I tried to tell myself that it was guilt, that my mind was playing tricks, that my own trauma from childhood had manifested as a hallucination. But I could not. I had touched him. I had held him in my hands. And now he was something else, something that existed outside of the rules of logic and reality. The next time I ventured near water, I felt the pull immediately, a tug at my chest, as if the tide itself was calling me to him. I did not go, but I could hear him, whispering just beneath the surface, calling my name, laughing softly, crying softly, and I realized with a chill that I had opened a door I could never close. Days blurred into nights, and the boundaries between reality and hallucination began to fade. I stopped trusting cameras, recordings, and even my own senses. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every drop of rain carried a whisper. I began recording everything, documenting every sound, every fleeting shadow, every irregular heartbeat, hoping for proof, hoping for an explanation. But the recordings were useless, static, nothing, blank screens. And then, the first news story appeared. A woman was found at the pier, floating face down in the gray water. No signs of trauma, no witnesses, no explanations. Cameras caught her entering the water alone, fully clothed, then disappearing beneath the surface. The news anchor spoke calmly, clinically, but I felt my stomach lurch. I knew. She had my face. I had been watching, recording, documenting my own life. Yet somehow, in that news story, she was me, drenched, silent, disappearing into the same void where I had saved him. The realization hit me like a wave, cold and merciless. The child I saved, the one who had whispered that it was my turn, had been waiting, shaping, guiding events to bring me here. I was not the hero. I was not even alive in the way I thought. I had been part of a cycle I could not understand, a debt I did not realize I owed. And now, with the image of my double sinking into the gray water, I knew the story was not over. It never would be. After the news report, I could not sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, my double, floating in the gray water, the rain dripping off her hair like tears, her face eerily calm despite the horror of it. It was not just a reflection of fear, it was something deeper, something I could not put into words. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch toward me. Every sound carried whispers I could almost understand, but never fully did. I stopped going to work. My coworkers called, worried, but their voices sounded distant, like they were speaking from underwater. I avoided mirrors, because in the reflection I sometimes saw the boy standing behind me, just for a second, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide, almost accusing. He did not speak, not yet, but his presence was enough to make my chest tighten. I started sleeping on the floor, afraid of the bed, afraid of waking up in another version of myself. The first real break in reality came when I opened my laptop. I wanted to check my recordings, the ones I had been making obsessively since that night at the pier. I was sure I would find proof, some explanation, anything. But the files were gone. All of them. Every single video, every photo, every audio file I had recorded over the past weeks had disappeared without a trace. In their place, a single folder remained, labeled simply, Return. I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook violently. When I finally clicked, I found only one video inside. It was footage of the pier, but not as it had been on the night I saved him. The rain was black, heavier than any storm I had ever seen, and the waves moved like liquid shadows. In the center, a figure struggled, small, familiar, but wrong. Its limbs were elongated, twisted in impossible ways, and its face, when it lifted toward the camera, was not fully human. It was my child, or at least a child shaped like the one I had saved, but eyes empty, mouth moving in silence. I dropped the laptop. The video played on its own after a few seconds, looping endlessly, the child staring directly at me through the screen. And then, in a voice I could feel rather than hear, it said my name. I waited for you, it whispered. I screamed. I ran out of my apartment, into the rain-soaked streets, but no one was there. It was as if the city had emptied, leaving only the storm, the sound of my own footsteps, and the echo of that voice. I did not stop running until I reached the pier, the place where everything began. But when I arrived, the pier was empty. The water was calm, glassy, reflecting nothing of the storm that had raged in the video. I called out for him, for the boy, for myself, but there was no answer. Days later, I saw him again in the reflection of a shop window. He was smaller than I remembered, but there was something ancient in his gaze, something that made me feel like I had crossed a line I could never return from. He raised a hand and pointed at me, then vanished before I could move. I realized I was not just losing my mind, I was being led. Every time I thought I was alone, he was there, guiding, watching, waiting. My attempts to rationalize failed. Friends suggested therapy, psychiatric evaluation, medication, but I refused. If this was a hallucination, it was the most vivid, consistent one in the history of hallucinations. It had rules, a pattern, and it demanded my attention. One night, unable to bear the silence, I returned to the pier. The wind was sharp, slicing through my wet coat. I walked slowly along the planks, staring at the water, listening. And then I saw him. Not far from the edge, standing on the surface as if the water were solid. The boy from the night I saved, or what I thought was him, tilted his head and smiled. But it was not the innocent smile I remembered. It was knowing, deliberate, and a warning. "You should not have saved me," he said, voice low, distant, carrying a weight I could not comprehend. "Why?" I whispered, my throat tight. "You're alive. You're alive?" He laughed, a sound that made my stomach churn. "Alive? I'm not what you think. You brought me into your world, and now it belongs to me." I felt a chill that went beyond the cold. The pier, the water, the rain, all of it seemed to shrink inward, pressing against me, demanding attention, demanding obedience. I realized with a sinking heart that my life since that night had been nothing but preparation, leading me here, to him. I tried to step back, to run, but my feet felt rooted, as if the planks themselves were holding me in place. He lifted a hand, and the water around him rippled, glowing faintly, black like ink. The reflection showed not just him, but me, twisted, submerged, screaming silently beneath the surface. "You saved me," he said, "but you did not save yourself. And now, it's your turn." I fell to my knees, shaking. The storm seemed to intensify, lightning splitting the sky, thunder crashing like a drumbeat in my chest. I understood, suddenly, what the whispers, the shadows, the videos, the reflections had meant. I was not being haunted. I was being prepared. The child I saved was not a child. He was something older, something patient, and I had become part of the cycle, part of the debt that demanded repayment. I tried to call for help, to reach for my phone, but it slipped from my hands, landing in the water, swallowed instantly. I was alone, completely alone. And yet, I was not alone. The boy was there, stepping closer, water dripping from his hair, eyes fixed on mine. "Do you remember the night?" he asked, voice soft, almost tender. "Do you remember what you did?" "Yes," I whispered, tears running down my face. "I saved you. I saved you." He shook his head slowly, a sad, knowing gesture. "No, you saved me, yes, but you also took the place of another. You chose, without knowing, and now the balance is broken. Everything you know is a lie, and now it's time to pay." I wanted to fight, to run, to scream, but my body did not respond. The rain fell harder, drumming on my skin, my hair, my eyes. The water rose around me, cold, relentless, whispering secrets I could not understand. And then, just as suddenly, he reached for me, small hands but impossible strength, and I felt myself being pulled toward the surface of the water. I gasped, my mind screaming, but the world had shifted. I was not on the pier anymore. I was under it. The water surrounded me, dark, heavy, and alive. Shapes moved in the shadows, shapes I could not identify. The boy's eyes were everywhere, watching, guiding, judging. And then I understood. I was not being saved. I had never been saved. The boy had been waiting, yes, but for me. for this moment, for me to enter the water fully, to cross into his world, to take my place in the cycle. I felt my body go numb, my mind fracturing, and a horrifying clarity settled in. I had become the story. I had become the debt. The water closed over my head, and the last thing I saw before darkness took me was the boy's face, smiling, not innocent, not childlike, but eternal, patient, and utterly terrifying. When I surfaced, or at least thought I did, the world was different. The rain had stopped, the gray clouds dissipated, but the pier felt alien, distorted, like I had stepped into a memory that did not belong to me. My clothes were dry, though my hair still dripped, and the air carried a strange, metallic scent. The boy was there, standing at the edge, waiting, silent, his eyes reflecting something I could not name. "You did not understand before," he said softly. "I am not a child. I never was. You saw what you wanted, and your hands saved me, but that was never enough. Now you must see." The pier seemed to shift beneath me, planks stretching and twisting as if alive. Shadows moved unnaturally, like long fingers tracing my every step. I wanted to turn back, to run, but the pull toward him was magnetic, undeniable. The voice inside my head whispered fragments of memory I had never lived. Other nights, other lives, faces I did not recognize, crying, drowning, waiting. I realized then that the child I had saved, the boy, was older than time, patient beyond comprehension. He had waited for someone like me, someone desperate, someone willing to cross the boundary between life and something else. And now he had me. "You see the cameras?" he asked. "You saw yourself on them, alone, but you were never alone. I was there, always, watching, learning, choosing." I shivered. I remembered the footage, the looping videos, the shadows behind me, the whispers in empty rooms. He had been orchestrating it all, guiding me, preparing me, shaping reality to bring me here. The revelation was like ice in my veins. I had never acted freely. Every choice, every step, every breath had been manipulated, and now the debt was calling. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "You saved me, yes, but in doing so, you opened a door. The world you know, the rules you follow, the lives you lead, they are not your own. You took a place that was never yours, and now it must be balanced." The water around him began to ripple unnaturally, black and thick, swallowing reflections, distorting the pier, warping reality. I wanted to step back, but my feet did not obey. He raised his hand, and the water rose like a living wall between us, glistening, impossible. "You will join me," he said, "not as yourself, not as who you think you are, but as a part of the cycle, as the next debt, and then someone else will be chosen." My mind raced. I tried to fight, to resist, to think rationally, but it was useless. Every scream caught in my throat, every movement sluggish, every thought bending under the weight of inevitability. I realized with horror that this was not just a choice, but a destiny I had already stepped into the moment I touched him in the water. He extended a small hand toward me. I felt the pull, subtle at first, then overwhelming, a force that seemed to bend the air itself. I wanted to scream, to refuse, to break free, but my body moved against my will, drawn forward. The edge of the pier blurred, the world stretched, the sky turned silver and black simultaneously. "You were brave," he said, almost tenderly, "but bravery is not enough. You must accept what you are, what you have done, and what comes next." And then the water surged over me, icy and alive, swallowing my legs, rising past my waist, chest, neck. I struggled, but the resistance was like fighting gravity itself. And in the chaos, I saw glimpses of the past, the other children, other people I had seen, other faces in the water, all waiting, all part of the same cycle, all silent witnesses to the same truth. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. My vision narrowed, focused only on him, his expression calm, knowing, inevitable. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the reflection of myself, twisted and submerged beneath the black water, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. When I awoke, I was no longer on the pier. I was in a place that was water and air at once, a liminal space that stretched beyond comprehension. The boy was there, unchanged, waiting. "Welcome," he said. "You understand now. You are part of this. You are the debt returned, the cycle continued. And one day, you will wait as I have waited." I tried to speak, to argue, to plead, but words were meaningless here. Time had no meaning, space had no boundaries, and my body had no weight. I was aware, conscious, terrified, but powerless. The boy circled me, his small face smiling, eyes endless. "You cannot escape. You cannot go back. You can only wait." As I waited, as the others waited, and one day, I understood the pattern, the horrible inevitability. Every life saved, every act of mercy was part of the ledger, a debt to be repaid in ways no human mind could comprehend. I had acted selflessly, but that selflessness had bound me, and now I was tethered to something eternal, unyielding, and utterly alien. The water around us shimmered, and I saw countless faces beneath the surface, trapped, waiting, silent, each one a link in the endless chain. I realized, with a cold, horrifying clarity, that this was not punishment, nor was it reward. It was balance. I had saved the boy, yes, but in doing so, I had entered the ledger. And now I was part of it. "You were brave," he repeated almost gently, "but bravery does not free you. It only brings you here. You are the next, and the cycle continues." And then he vanished, leaving me alone in the endless water, the silent faces surrounding me, the impossibility of my new reality pressing from every direction. I screamed, but it was meaningless. The cycle had claimed me. I understood finally, completely, that I had never been the hero. I had only been a participant in a ritual older than memory, and the ledger was infinite. The last thought I had before the water closed over me was a question I already knew the answer to. Who would come next? And I knew, with absolute certainty, that someone would. Someone else would hear the call from the water. Someone else would see the flailing form. Someone else would think they were saving a child, and the cycle would begin again. And then the darkness took me, and I understood that I would wait. I would wait as he had waited. I would wait as countless others had waited, until someone else made the same mistake I had, and the debt was returned.